He was forged in the crucibles of Kandahar and the crushing dark of the deep sea, a protector of a nation that barely knew his name. Yet back in the world, on leave, he was a ghost, a weapon without a target, searching for a peace he wasn't sure he had earned. His only sanctuary was the silent understanding of the animal at his side, a four-legged warrior named Ares, whose loyalty was the only legacy that mattered. But in the rain-slicked streets of a city that promised tranquility, a different kind of war was brewing, a secret whispered in boardrooms and paid for in blood. He was a guardian looking for rest, but instead he unearthed a secret that would threaten to consume everything. Now, a dedicated police officer and her faithful Canine are seconds from death, caught in a kill box they never saw coming, and the only person who can save them is the man who is trying to forget how. What do you do when the war follows you home? Tell us where you are watching from in the comments below, because this story of loyalty and sacrifice begins now. God blesses you and your families. The Seattle mist was a constant companion, a damp grey breath that clung to the city and gave the air a sharp, clean smell of salt and pine. For Silas, it was a suffocating blanket. He stood on the balcony of a sterile, overpriced apartment he'd rented for the month, the city lights below blurring into a watercolor of indifference. On leave, the words tasted like ash. It wasn't rest, it was a cage of quiet streets, polite conversations, and the crushing weight of stillness. In the field, there was clarity, target, objective, threat. Here the threats were formless, ghosts of memory that crept in with the fog. Beside him, Ares, a Belgian Malinois with a coat the color of dried earth and eyes like chips of amber, whined softly. The dog didn't shift his weight or break his vigil, but the sound was a question, a check-in. Silas reached down, his hand, scarred and calloused, sinking into the thick fur of the dog's ruff. "I know, boy," he murmured, the words a low rumble. Too quiet. Ares was his anchor. The dog had been with him through 2 deployments, a silent, intuitive partner who understood the language of a cocked head and a tightened grip. He was a living, breathing extension of Silas's own senses, his own will. Here, in this world of concrete and glass, Ares was the only thing that felt real. The only part of that life that had been allowed to follow him home. A sudden crackle of distant sound cut through the city's hum. Not a car backfiring, not construction. Silas's head snapped up, his posture shifting instantly from relaxed to coiled. It was the flat, angry percussion of gunfire. Multiple shots, tight grouping. Then a different report, a higher caliber. A reply. Ares was already on his feet, a low growl vibrating in his chest, his ears swiveling like radar dishes. Silas didn't hesitate. He was moving before the conscious thought had fully formed, the fog of leave burning away to reveal the ice-cold focus of the operator beneath. He grabbed the go bag he never unpacked, a simple black backpack containing a medkit, a suppressed pistol he was licensed to carry, and a few other essentials. There was no debate, no weighing of options. A predator was loose in his sanctuary, however temporary that sanctuary might be. He and Ares moved through the apartment with an unnerving synchronicity, a 2-man team flowing toward the sound. Down the elevator, through the lobby where the doorman barely registered the man and his dog moving with such purpose, and out into the damp night. The sounds were closer now, echoing off the wet pavement and glass towers. Sirens began to wail in the distance, a chorus of approaching chaos. Silas cut through an alley, the scent of rain and garbage thick in the air. He could hear shouting now, commands, cries of pain. He rounded the corner and saw it. A scene of violent pandemonium. A police cruiser, riddled with bullet holes, was canted against a storefront. 2 blocks down, another was a flaming wreck. Pinned behind the ruined cruiser was a lone officer, returning fire at a figure positioned in the second-story window of a darkened office building. The incoming fire was precise, controlled, not panicked spraying. It was methodical, suppressive. The officer was trapped. Beside her, a Canine, a German shepherd, was barking furiously, straining against its handler's grip, a loyal guardian trying to shield its partner. Silas analyzed the geometry of the fight in a fraction of a second. The shooter had the high ground, a superior field of fire. The officer was in a kill box. The approaching sirens meant more police would soon pour into that same box, creating more targets, more chaos. He saw the glint of a scope from the window. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was an execution. He saw the officer flinch as a round sparked off the car door inches from her head. Her return fire was sporadic, desperate. She was running out of time. Her dog, sensing her fear, barked with a frantic edge of desperation. Silas felt a cold, concentrated rage settle over him. This was his city now. This was his watch. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was an activation. He unzipped his bag, his movements economical and precise. He gave Aries a single, sharp command. Heel. The dog fell in tight against his left leg, silent and attentive, his amber eyes fixed on Silas's face, waiting for the only command that mattered. The world narrowed to the shooter in the window, the officer in the street, and the deadly space between them. Silas was no longer a man on leave. He was a weapon, and he had just found his target. He moved into the shadows, a specter of violence in the Seattle mist, the rhythmic beat of his heart, the only drum in a war that had just been declared. The shooter was patient. That was the first thing Silas registered. A patient shooter was a trained shooter. He wasn't wasting ammunition. Each 3-round burst was designed to keep the officer's head down, to chip away at her cover, to psychologically dismantle her. Silas melted into the deep shadows of a recessed doorway across the street, the rough brick cold against his back. Aries stood beside him, a statue of coiled muscle, his breathing perfectly silent, his focus absolute. From this new vantage point, Silas had a clearer angle. He could see the officer more clearly now. Her name tag, Rostova, was just visible on her vest. She was young, determined, but her movements were becoming sluggish. She was likely wounded. Her Canine, a magnificent German shepherd, was a mirror of Aries's own discipline, staying low, offering a target no larger than necessary, but its bared teeth were a clear signal of its lethal intent. It was a guardian, just like her, and they were dying together. Silas processed the tactical problem. The shooter was dug in, likely with multiple firing positions prepared. A frontal assault, even by the arriving SWAT teams, would be costly. They would treat it like a barricaded suspect, a slow, methodical process of negotiation and containment. But this wasn't a suspect. This was a hunter, and Officer Rostova was the bait. He had maybe 90 seconds before she bled out or her cover failed completely. He couldn't wait for the cavalry. He had to change the equation. He had to become an unanticipated variable. He scanned the building, a 4-story office complex, modern, with large plate glass windows. The shooter was on the 2nd floor, in what looked like a corner office. Fire escapes, rear access. Too slow. He needed to disrupt the shooter's rhythm now. He needed to draw his fire. It was a risk, a calculated one. He looked at Ares, whose gaze never left his. He gave a slight nod, a silent communication that passed between them 1,000 times before. "Watch my back. Be ready." He pulled the suppressed pistol from his bag. It felt like an extension of his own hand. He wouldn't return fire. That would give away his position, turn it into a 2-on-1 fight he couldn't win from this distance. He was escaping. He was a weapon without a target. No, that wasn't right. He wasn't escaping. He was repositioning. He was a weapon finding its optimal firing solution. He broke cover, not with a frantic sprint, but with a fluid, predatory lope, keeping low, using the line of parked cars as intermittent cover. He was a grey man in grey clothes moving through a grey city, a phantom against the wet asphalt. A round hissed past his ear, followed by the sharp crack as it broke the sound barrier. The shooter had seen him. Good. The pressure was off Rostova, if only for a second. Another burst chewed up the pavement where he'd been a moment before, faster than he anticipated. The shooter was tracking him, predicting his movement, highly skilled. Silas didn't dive for cover. He accelerated, zigzagging, making himself an impossible target. He was no longer just an operator, he was a problem the shooter hadn't factored into his meticulously planned ambush. He saw Rostova use the brief lull to slump further behind the car, trying to apply pressure to a wound on her leg. Her Canine nudged her hand, a soft whine cutting through the air, a sound of profound concern. That image burned itself into Silas's mind, the bond, the loyalty, the silent pact between two protectors. It was a reflection of his own world, of his bond with Ares. It made this personal. He reached the side of the building, pressing himself flat against the cold, rain-slicked brick. He was in the shooter's blind spot now, directly below him. The sirens were deafeningly close. Squad cars were screeching to a halt, setting up a perimeter. Officers taking cover, shouting commands into their radios. They were turning the street into a stage, but they didn't know the play had already changed. Silas looked up. The second-floor window was dark, a gaping maw in the building's face. He could try to climb, but the facade was smooth glass and steel. He needed another way in. He glanced back the way he came. Ares was still in the doorway, unmoving, a silent sentinel. Ready. Silas's mind worked, processing angles, entry points, probabilities. Then he saw it. A steel maintenance door set back in a small alcove, probably leading to a utility corridor or basement. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot he had. He made the split-second choice. He wasn't going to be a distraction. He was going to be the blade in the dark. He was going in. The lock on the maintenance door was commercial grade, but for Silas, it was a minor inconvenience. A few seconds of focused tension with a tool from his pack, and the mechanism gave way with a muted click. He slipped inside, Ares at his heels, the door closing silently behind them, plunging them into near-total darkness. The air was cool and smelled of dust and ozone from the building's electrical systems. They were in a concrete corridor, a single line of emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows. The chaos of the street outside was suddenly muffled, a distant, chaotic heartbeat. Here, in the belly of the building, the fight became intimate, personal. Silas stood perfectly still, letting his eyes adjust, his ears straining to pass the new soundscape. The hum of ventilation, the drip of a leaky pipe somewhere in the darkness. And above, the faint scrape of a boot on a floorboard. The shooter was repositioning. Silas gave Aries a series of silent hand signals. Fan out. Search. Silent. The dog moved away from him without a sound, a shadow detaching from a shadow, his claws making no noise on the polished concrete. Aries would clear the lower level, ensuring no surprises were waiting for them. He was Silas's early warning system, his partner in the lethal chess match to come. Silas moved in the opposite direction, pistol held in a low-ready position, his body a study in controlled aggression. He found a stairwell, the metal steps echoing slightly as he put his weight on them. He ascended, each step a deliberate, measured placement of his foot. He did not rush. Haste was the enemy of survival. As he reached the second-floor landing, the sounds from the street grew louder again, filtering through the windows at the end of the hall. He could hear the crackle of police radios, the shouts of officers establishing a perimeter. He was inside their cordon, a ghost in their machine. He paused at the door leading from the stairwell to the second-floor hallway, pressing his ear against the cold metal. He heard nothing. He took a small fiber optic scope from his pack, no thicker than a pencil, and slid it under the door. The hallway was empty. Standard corporate chic. Grey carpet, brushed steel fixtures, motivational posters on the walls. Pathetic. He opened the door a crack and slipped through, Aries joining him a moment later, appearing at his side as if from nowhere. They moved down the hall as one, a seamless unit of man and animal. They were hunters now, stalking their prey in its lair. The corner office was at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar. A fatal mistake. Arrogance. The shooter believed he was in complete control of the situation outside, never considering a threat from within. Silas signaled for Aries to hold position around the corner, out of the line of fire. He crept forward, his breathing slow and even, his heart a steady, powerful drum. He could see a sliver of the room through the opening, a large mahogany desk, a leather chair, and the back of the shooter, who was kneeling, his rifle resting on the windowsill, scope trained on the street below. He was wearing black tactical gear, professional and clean, too clean for a common criminal. Silas raised his pistol, the sights aligning perfectly on the target's head. It was a simple, clean shot. The mission objective: neutralize the threat. But something stayed his hand. It wasn't about the kill. It was about the answer. Who was this man? Why was he trying to execute a police officer with such military precision? He heard the shooter mutter into a small radio on his vest. Target is still pinned. No clean shot. Stand by for exfil. There were more of them. This wasn't a lone gunman. It was a team. This changed everything. This wasn't just an ambush. It was the opening move of a much larger game. Silas knew, in that instant, that killing this man wouldn't end it. It would only announce his presence. He needed him alive. He holstered his pistol and drew the combat knife from his belt. The blade was non-reflective, dark as a new moon. He took a deep, silent breath and moved. He crossed the threshold of the office like a wraith, his footsteps swallowed by the thick carpet. The shooter was so focused on his scope, on the world outside the window, that he never heard him coming. Silas was on him in 2 strides, one hand clamping over the man's mouth, stifling his cry of surprise, the other arm snaking around his chest in a chokehold. The man struggled, his body lurching, but it was like fighting a machine. Silas applied pressure, not to kill, but to restrict blood flow to the brain. The man's struggles weakened, his body going limp. In seconds, he was unconscious. Silas lowered him gently to the floor, quickly disarming him and binding his hands with zip ties from his pack. He looked out the window. Officer Rostova was still behind the car, but now medics were with her, a shield of bodies and ballistic blankets protecting them as they worked. She was going to make it. Her Canine stood a protective watch over her, its gaze fixed on the window where the threat had been. Silas picked up the shooter's radio. "Exfil compromised. Go dark," he whispered into it in a flat, unrecognizable voice, then crushed it under his heel. He had the shooter. He had the first piece of the puzzle. But as he looked down at the unconscious man, he saw a small, distinctive tattoo on his wrist, a stylized raven clutching a key. It was a symbol he'd seen once before in a classified briefing about a rogue private military corporation, a ghost entity known only as the Corvus Group. The war hadn't just followed him home. He had stumbled into a whole new one. The aftermath was a different kind of storm. The sudden, shocking silence where gunfire had been was quickly filled by the roar of official procedure. SWAT officers, clad in heavy armor, breached the building with methodical, thunderous efficiency, only to find their quarry already bound and unconscious on the floor of a high-end office. And standing over him was Silas, a quiet man in civilian clothes with a dog at his side, who watched every new arrival with unnerving intelligence. To the uniformed officers, he was an anomaly, a civilian who had bypassed their perimeter and neutralized a professional gunman with nothing more than a pistol and a knife. He was a problem they didn't know how to categorize. "On your knees, hands where I can see them," a young officer shouted, his voice tight with adrenaline, his rifle leveled at Silas's chest. Silas didn't move. He simply raised his hands slowly, his expression unreadable. He had expected this. He was a variable they couldn't account for, and in their world, unaccounted variables were threats. Ares, sensing the shift in tone, let out a low, guttural growl, stepping forward slightly to place himself between Silas and the police. "Dog, back," Silas said, his voice calm and even. Ares immediately obeyed, but the growl remained, a quiet promise of violence held in reserve. Before the situation could escalate, a new voice cut through the tension. "Stand down. He's the one who saved me." Officer Eva Rostova was being helped through the doorway by two medics, her leg bandaged, her face pale but set with a fierce determination. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, locked onto Silas. She took in the scene, the subdued gunman, Silas standing calmly amidst a sea of leveled weapons, his magnificent dog at a silent guard. Her own Canine, Max, was at her side, whining softly, his concern for his partner overriding everything else. The young officer hesitated, looking from his sergeant to Rostova. The sergeant, a grizzled veteran, sized up Silas with a practiced eye. He saw the way Silas stood, the economy of his movement, the quiet confidence that radiated from him. This was no ordinary citizen. "Who are you?" the sergeant asked, his tone less aggressive, more inquisitive. "A tourist," Silas replied, his voice flat. It was neither a lie nor the truth. It was a deflection. Rostova pushed away from the medics, taking a pained step forward. "He saved my life. He drew the shooter's fire and went in alone while you were all still setting up a perimeter. Whoever he is, he's on our side." Her defense was passionate, absolute. In that moment, a bond was forged between them, a debt of life owed and acknowledged. Silas saw in her the same unwavering loyalty she gave her partner, Max. She was a protector, through and through. The sergeant, seeing the conviction in his officer's eyes, made a decision. He lowered his rifle and nodded to his men. "Secure the prisoner. Get him out of here. And someone get a statement from our tourist." The next few hours were a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee at the downtown precinct. Silas was a ghost in their system. His identification was real, but revealed almost nothing. He answered their questions with clipped, precise statements that gave away no tactical information, no hint of his training. He was a man out for a walk with his dog who heard gunfire and acted. It was a story so simple, it was almost unbelievable, yet his actions spoke for themselves. While Silas was stonewalling the detectives, Eva Rostova was using her credentials to do her own digging. Sitting in a quiet corner of the precinct, ignoring the orders of her captain to go home and rest, she ran the shooter's prints. The result came back classified, flagged by Homeland Security. But she pulled a string, called in a favor from a friend in intelligence, and got a name: Anton Voss. And with the name came a single redacted line in his employment history: Security Consultant, the Croft Corporation. The name hung in the air like poison. The Croft Corporation was a titan of global logistics and private security, run by the charismatic and untouchably wealthy Julian Croft. They were a local success story, a source of immense civic pride, and their headquarters was the gleaming, monolithic tower that dominated the city's skyline. Why would a security consultant for Seattle's most powerful corporation be trying to execute a Canine officer in the middle of the street? Eva looked across the busy squad room and saw Silas sitting alone, Ares at his feet. He looked out of place, a wolf in a sheep pen, exuding a dangerous stillness. She knew with a chilling certainty that the simple story he was telling was a lie, and she knew with that same certainty that he was the only person who could help her find the truth. She picked up her tablet, the name Julian Croft glowing on the screen, and walked towards him. The war was just beginning. The precinct captain, a man named Davies with a politician's smile and a bureaucrat's heart, officially warned Eva to drop it. "The shooter is in federal custody, Rostova," he said, his voice low and paternal, a tone she knew meant he was being anything but. "The feds are taking the lead. The Croft Corporation is cooperating fully. They claim Voss was a disgruntled former employee. It's over. You're on medical leave. Go home, heal." It was a neat, tidy story packaged for public consumption, but Eva had seen Anton Voss's eyes. They weren't disgruntled. They were cold, professional. The same coldness she now saw in her captain's gaze as he lied to her face. The pressure was coming from above, from somewhere powerful enough to make a police captain bury a case involving one of his own officers. That somewhere had a name: Croft. She found Silas outside, standing in the persistent Seattle drizzle, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement around him. Ares was at his side, a dark, silent shape. The dog watched her approach, but made no sound, recognizing her as an ally. "They're burying it," Eva said, without preamble. She stood beside him, not too close, respecting his space. Her leg throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. "Voss is being painted as a lone wolf. Croft Corporation is playing the victim. My captain told me to take a vacation." Silas didn't look at her. He continued to stare into the flow of nighttime traffic, his face partially obscured by shadow. "And you're not going to," he stated. It wasn't a question. He wasn't just shooting at me, she said, her voice tight with conviction. He was waiting. He let other patrol cars pass. He chose me. He chose my route. This was a planned hit, and my department is helping the man who ordered it cover it up. She finally had his full attention. He turned his head, and in the neon glow, she saw the intensity in his eyes. It was the look of a man who understood the geometry of violence, who knew that what happened on the street was only the final, bloody expression of a decision made in a quiet, carpeted room. "Why you?" Silas asked. The question was direct, stripped of all pleasantry. It was the question of an analyst, a strategist. "I don't know," she admitted, the uncertainty frustrating her. "I'm a Canine cop. I run traffic stops, respond to B&Es. I'm not working homicides or organized crime. It makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense," Silas countered, his voice a low rumble. "You weren't the target because of who you are. You were the target because of what you might have found. A random traffic stop. A routine check. You must have stumbled onto something. Seen something you weren't supposed to see, and they don't know if you know you saw it." The logic was cold, terrifying, and utterly convincing. It reframed the entire event. She wasn't a victim of random violence. She was a loose end they had failed to tie up. Her mind raced, replaying the last few weeks of her job, the endless stream of routine calls, the blur of faces and license plates. What had she seen? What had Max reacted to? "I need access to your patrol car's dashcam footage," Silas said, his gaze unwavering. "And the logs from your onboard computer for the last month. They've already impounded my vehicle. It's evidence. I can't get near it." "You can't," he agreed. "But the data exists on a server. You have a login. You have a password. Get me the data." He wasn't asking. He was giving her a mission. For the first time since the shooting, the feeling of helpless rage inside her began to recede, replaced by a surge of purpose. He was offering her a way to fight back. "And what about you?" she asked, challenging him. "Who are you, really? Why are you doing this?" Silas looked down at Ares, who nudged his hand with his wet nose. His expression softened for a fraction of a second. "I'm a man who believes in loyalty," he said, his eyes lifting to meet hers again. "Your partner, Max, was willing to die for you. My partner would do the same for me. That kind of legacy is worth protecting." He didn't tell her his name, his rank, or his unit. He told her the only thing that mattered. He was a protector, just like her. "There's a coffee shop, The Grind, on Pier 57. Be there at E600 tomorrow. Bring the data," he said. Then, without another word, he and Ares turned and disappeared into the night, leaving Eva Rostova standing in the rain, a stolen police login, a throbbing leg, and the dangerous, intoxicating glimmer of hope. The digital files Eva procured were a mountain of noise. Hours of dashcam footage showing rain-streaked windshields and the monotonous crawl of Seattle traffic. Gigabytes of call logs and license plate checks. To a normal person, it was meaningless data. To Silas, it was a battlefield he could map. In a small, anonymous hotel room far from his rented apartment, he worked. Ares lay at the door, a silent guardian, while Silas sat cross-legged on the floor, a ruggedized laptop open before him. He didn't look at the footage. He processed it. He wasn't watching for crime. He was searching for anomalies, for things that were out of place. He cross-referenced every license plate Eva had run in the past month with a database of vehicles registered to the Croft Corporation and its known subsidiaries. He flagged every interaction that occurred within a 5-mile radius of any known Croft property. He worked with a terrifying, single-minded focus, the outside world ceasing to exist. Eva watched him, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She had never seen anyone work like this. He was a machine, his mind a finely tuned instrument of pattern recognition. He was a hunter sifting through the digital tracks of his prey. After 3 hours of silence, he finally spoke. Here. He pointed to the screen. The footage was from 2 weeks prior. It showed a routine traffic stop on a rain-swept industrial road near the port. A black panel van with no markings. Ava remembered it. The driver had been nervous, overly polite. His paperwork was in order, and she had let him go with a warning for a broken tail light. "What about it?" she asked. The driver was clean. The van wasn't stolen. "Watch Max," Silas instructed. On the screen, her Canine partner was in the back of the cruiser, but he wasn't calm. He was alert, his nose pressed against the cage, pointed directly at the van. He wasn't barking or growling, but his posture was rigid, his focus absolute. He had scented something. Something his training had taught him was important. "He's alerting," Eva breathed, a knot of ice forming in her stomach. But what was it? Drugs? Explosives? I would have searched the vehicle. "He wasn't alerting on contraband," Silas said, zooming in on the van. He enhanced the image, cleaning up the pixelation. On the rear door, almost invisible under a layer of road grime, was a faint symbol, a stenciled raven clutching a key, the same tattoo that was on the shooter's wrist. "He was alerting on the scent of his own kind," Silas continued, his voice grim. "The Corvus Group uses highly trained attack dogs in their operations. Max smelled another working dog, one that had recently been in that van. A dog trained for war." The pieces slammed together in Eva's mind. The van wasn't carrying illegal goods. It was a transport vehicle for an off-the-books private military team operating right here, in her city. She had pulled them over. She had seen their symbol. They couldn't be sure if she'd recognized it, if she'd made a note of it, so they targeted her for elimination. Not out of malice, but out of cold, professional risk assessment. She was a liability. "Where were they going?" Eva asked, her voice barely a whisper. Silas was already ahead of her. He triangulated the van's position with cell tower data he had acquired. He overlaid it with satellite imagery and city zoning maps. "This industrial road is a primary access route to one place," he said, and a new image filled the screen. It was a sprawling, isolated complex deep in the forested foothills of the Cascade Mountains, an hour outside the city. Officially, it was a Croft Corporation logistics and data storage facility, a sanitized corporate name for what Silas instantly recognized as something else entirely. "That's not a data center," he said, pointing out the reinforced perimeter fencing, the microwave emitter security towers, the strategically placed choke points. "That's a black site, a private military base. That's their sanctuary." The word hung in the air, a bitter irony. A place of peace and safety, twisted into a den for killers. He looked from the screen to Eva, his eyes hard as flint. "We know their what, their why, and their where," he said. "Now we go dark. We go hunting." The air in the Cascades was thin and sharp, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was a world away from the grit and noise of the city, a place of profound, ancient silence. But for Silas and Eva, it was enemy territory. Dressed in dark, functional clothing, They moved through the dense undergrowth on the ridge overlooking the Croft facility. Ares and Max moved with them, not as pets, but as members of the team, their steps silent, their senses alive to every snap of a twig, every whisper of the wind. The facility was just as Silas had analyzed from the satellite images, only more imposing in a person. It was a scar of concrete and steel carved into the pristine wilderness, surrounded by a 12-foot fence topped with razor wire. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, not with the lazy gait of security guards, but with the disciplined, alert posture of soldiers. They were Corvus Group operators. "They're not just guarding data," Eva whispered into her radio, her binoculars trained on the main gate. "They're running a full-blown training and staging area. This is illegal on a dozen different levels." "It's more than that," Silas replied, his voice a low hiss in her ear. He was lying prone beside her, using a high-powered scope to observe the loading bay. "They're moving weapons." He described what he was seeing: crates being loaded onto unmarked semi-trucks, long, rectangular cases consistent with sniper rifles and RPGs, smaller, heavier crates that could only be ammunition. This wasn't just a training base. It was an armory, a nexus for an illegal arms trafficking operation. Julian Croft wasn't just a powerful CEO. He was a warlord, using his corporate empire as a shield for his criminal enterprise. They needed proof, hard evidence that couldn't be buried by high-priced lawyers or corrupt officials. They needed to get inside. "The perimeter is solid," Eva assessed. "Thermal sensors, motion detectors. We'll never get through without tripping an alarm." "We're not going through it," Silas said. "We're going under it." He pointed to a drainage culvert on his map, a concrete pipe that ran from a nearby stream under the fence line and into the facility's drainage system. It was a flaw in an otherwise perfect defense, a dirty, dangerous route, but their only way in. As night fell, cloaking the mountains in an impenetrable darkness, they made their move. The dogs, their most valuable assets, whined softly, sensing the tension. Silas calmed Ares with a hand on his neck, while Eva did the same for Max. The bond between them was their greatest strength. They slipped down the ridge like ghosts and found the culvert. The opening was a black maw, smelling of rust and stagnant water. "I'll go first," Silas said, unclipping a small, powerful flashlight from his pack. "You're on comms. Max and Ares will cover our backs. If we get separated, our rally point is the waterfall 2 clicks east. Go on my signal." He gave Eva a look, a silent acknowledgement of the immense risk they were about to take. She met his gaze and nodded, her fear eclipsed by her resolve. This was for every cop who had been outgunned, for every official who had looked the other way. This was for justice. Silas took a breath and plunged into the darkness of the pipe, the cold water seeping into his boots. The mission was on. The crawl through the culvert was suffocating. The pipe was narrow, the air thick with the smell of decay, and the sound of their own breathing was unnervingly loud in the confined space. Silas moved with a practiced, fluid motion, the beam of his flashlight cutting a small, wavering circle in the oppressive dark. Eva followed, trying to control the claustrophobia that threatened to close in on her. The dogs were behind her, their panting the only other sound. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Silas stopped. Ahead, a faint light filtered through a heavy iron grate. They had reached the interior of the compound. Using a small portable cutting torch, Silas worked on the rusted hinges of the grate. The sound of sizzling metal seemed deafeningly loud. Every second felt like an hour. When the grate finally came loose, he pushed it aside and hauled himself out, immediately scanning their new surroundings. They were in a concrete drainage channel at the edge of the motor pool. 50 yards away, the loading bay was brightly lit, the activity of loading the trucks continuing under the glare of floodlights. They had made it inside. Their objective was the main administration building. According to the schematics Silas had memorized, it housed the central server room. That was where the real evidence would be. Shipping manifests, financial records, communication logs, the digital heart of Croft's illegal empire. They moved in short, silent bursts, using the shadows cast by parked vehicles as cover. The dogs were invaluable, their keen senses alerting them to the approaching footsteps of a patrol long before they could be seen or heard. They froze behind a large armored truck as two Corvus operators walked past, their conversation drifting on the cold night air. "Final shipment for the Castile cartel," one of them said. "Croft wants the hardware moved before sunrise." The casual mention of a notorious drug cartel confirmed their worst suspicions. This was bigger than they could have imagined. They reached the administration building and found a side entrance. The lock was electronic, a keycard system. It was Ava's turn. Using a device that could clone and cycle through security frequencies, she held it up to the panel. The small screen on the device scrolled through thousands of codes. It was a slow, agonizing process. Seconds stretched into minutes. Suddenly, the light on the panel flashed green and the lock clicked open. They slipped inside, into the sterile, air-conditioned silence of the building. The server room was in the basement. As they descended the stairs, a new sound reached them. A low, rhythmic whining. It was the sound of a dog in distress. In the basement, they found it, a row of cages. Inside were more dogs, Malinois and Shepherds, all bearing the same lean, powerful build as Aries and Max. They were Corvus dogs, but they weren't being treated like soldiers. They were emaciated, some bearing fresh wounds. One cage held a litter of puppies crawling over their half-starved mother. This wasn't just a base. It was a breeding and training mill, churning out canine soldiers and discarding those that didn't meet their cruel standards. A wave of pure fury washed over Eva. Max whined, sensing the pain of the other animals. Ares stood rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Silas placed a hand on his dog's neck, his own face a mask of cold rage. This had just become more than a mission. It was a rescue. As Eva began working on the server room door, a voice echoed from a nearby speaker. Well, it seems we have rats in our sanctuary." The lights in the corridor flashed on, blinding them. From the end of the hall, Julian Croft appeared, flanked by a dozen heavily armed Corvus operators. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, a smug, arrogant smile on his face. "Officer Rostova," he said, his voice dripping with condescending charm. "I'm so glad you could join us. And you brought a friend. I do so admire your persistence. It's a quality we look for at the Croft Corporation. Unfortunately, in your case, it's also a terminal condition." They were trapped. The hallway was a kill box. Croft had been watching them the entire time. It had all been a trap. "You made a mistake coming here," Silas said, his voice dangerously calm as he and Ava drew their weapons, positioning themselves back to back. The dogs took up guard positions at their feet, teeth bared. "No," Croft replied with a chuckle, raising a hand to signal his men. "The mistake was yours. You see, I know who you are, Silas. I know all about your little ghost unit, and I know your weakness." He snapped his fingers. 2 operators emerged from a side room, dragging something with them. It was a silver hard case, the kind used for transporting sensitive equipment. "You came for my legacy," Croft sneered. "So I decided to take yours." He opened the case. Inside, nestled in the foam, was not a weapon or a bomb. It was a small silver whistle on a leather cord. Ares' whistle, the one Silas used for long-range, silent commands. The one that had been in his go-bag back at the hotel. They hadn't just been followed. They had been compromised from the very beginning. Croft's arrogance was his defining feature, and it would be his undoing. He saw the situation as a foregone conclusion, a demonstration of his absolute power. He had them outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a concrete corridor. He savored the moment, playing the part of the triumphant villain. But he wasn't dealing with a cornered cop and some random vigilante. He was dealing with a Tier 1 operator who saw the world not as a stage, but as a series of tactical problems to be solved. And Julian Croft had just presented him with the solution. "You think that whistle gives you control?" Silas asked, his voice deceptively level. He was buying time, his mind racing, processing the environment, the enemy's formation, the dogs' positions. "That whistle is a symbol of a bond you can't possibly comprehend." "Oh, I think I can," Croft retorted, plucking the whistle from its case. "It's a tool. Like this dog, like these men. They respond to the one in command. Watch." He put the whistle to his lips. Before he could blow, Silas gave a sharp, almost imperceptible hand signal to Ares. It was a command they had practiced 1,000 times in the dust of Afghanistan and the mud of training fields. Disrupt. Ares exploded into motion. He didn't charge Croft. He launched himself at the wall, ricocheting off the concrete with incredible force and slamming sideways into the 2 operators closest to Croft. The men, caught completely by surprise, stumbled, their rifles momentarily pointing at the ceiling. In that same instant, Eva, anticipating the move, opened fire, not at Croft, but at the overhead light fixtures. The hallway was plunged into strobing chaos as the fluorescent tubes shattered, raining down sparks and glass. Darkness and confusion, Silas's element. He and Eva moved as one, firing and advancing under the cover of the flickering emergency lights. The Corvus operators, momentarily blinded and disoriented by Ares' attack, returned fire wildly. Their professional discipline crumbled into panicked, inaccurate bursts that ricocheted dangerously off the concrete walls. Silas moved with a terrifying fluid grace, a phantom in the strobing darkness. He wasn't just shooting, he was disabling. 2 shots to a man's knee, another to a shoulder, neutralizing threats without creating a bloodbath. He was a surgeon with a pistol. Ava provided suppressive fire, her shots precise, forcing the remaining operators to stay behind cover. Max, her loyal guardian, moved with her, his ferocious barks adding to the auditory chaos, making it impossible for the enemy to communicate. Croft, his smug confidence shattered, scrambled backward, fumbling for his own sidearm. He was a businessman who played at being a warlord, but when faced with real violence, his facade cracked. He was a coward. Silas saw his opening. He vaulted over a row of cages, ignoring the yelps of the imprisoned dogs, and closed the distance to Croft. He didn't use his gun. He slammed into Croft with the force of a freight train, driving him back against the wall. The air rushed from Croft's lungs in a pained gasp. "My men will kill you," Croft choked out, his eyes wide with terror. "Your men work for money," Silas said, his voice a cold whisper in the dark, although the muzzle of his pistol pressed hard under Croft's chin. "I work for a cause." The remaining operators, seeing their leader captured and their comrades incapacitated, hesitated. Their loyalty was to a paycheck, not to the man who signed it. In the sudden silence, broken only by the panting of the dogs and the groan of wounded men, the fight was over. Eva kept her weapon trained on the remaining operators. "Drop them." "Now," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. One by one, they complied, letting their expensive rifles clatter to the floor. The battle was won, not by superior firepower, but by superior strategy, unbreakable loyalty, and the fatal arrogance of one man. Silas looked at the imprisoned dogs, then back at Croft, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "You built a sanctuary for killers," he said. "Now you're going to help us tear it down." The sun was rising over the Cascade Mountains, its golden light spilling over the peaks and into the valley. The cold, sterile compound that had been a monument to Julian Croft's greed was now a federal crime scene, swarming with FBI agents and law enforcement. The evidence they had unlocked from the servers was a digital bombshell, detailing illegal arms shipments, political payoffs, and assassination plots that reached the highest echelons of power. Croft's empire had crumbled overnight. On a nearby hill, away from the chaos, Silas and Eva stood watching. Aries and Max sat at their feet, occasionally nudging each other with a quiet, canine understanding. The rescued dogs from the facility were being tended to by animal welfare specialists, their journey from weapons of war to cherished partners just beginning. Eva's leg ached, but it was a good ache, the pain of a battle fought and won. She looked at Silas, who was staring at the horizon, his expression as unreadable as ever. "They offered me a promotion," she said quietly. "A detective's shield. Said I had good instincts." "They're right," Silas replied, his gaze not leaving the mountains. "You're a protector. It's who you are." "What about you?" she asked. "You'll just disappear again? Go back to being a ghost?" For the first time, a genuine, unguarded emotion crossed his face, a weariness, but also a flicker of something new, something like peace. He looked down at Aries, who rested his great head on his knee. He thought of the cage of his leave, the suffocating stillness. He had been a weapon without a target, a guardian without a sanctuary to protect. But here with this fierce, loyal cop and their two incredible dogs, he had found both, a mission, a purpose, a pack. "No," he said, finally turning to look at her, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "I think my leave is just getting started. This world has plenty of monsters. Someone has to hunt them." It wasn't the end of his war, but a new beginning. He was no longer just a soldier following orders. He was a guardian, self-deployed, with a new team at his side. He had found his legacy not in the medals he'd earned, but in the lives he chose to protect. The quiet warrior, the fierce cop, and their two loyal canines stood together as the new day dawned, a small, unlikely family forged in fire, ready for whatever darkness came next. Their sanctuary was not a place, but each other. The bond of true loyalty is the most powerful weapon on earth. It cannot be bought, it cannot be broken, and it will always triumph over darkness. If you believe in the power of loyalty and the spirit of a guardian, comment Amen below. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you and your families, always.